Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be making chicken and pastry. And chicken and pastry is what I grew up calling it. It's definitely more of an Eastern North Carolina, South Carolina type dish. A lot of people might refer to it as chicken and dumplings, but it's not really like chicken and dumplings as much because it's much thinner, and so you roll it very, very thin. The reason for this video is that this is one of the things that I learned right beside my Mima. She taught me this recipe. We used to roll it out on her Tupperware rolling mat that was about this big. I have that at my house somewhere, but she rolled it out super thin, laid it out on the counter. I can still see her in her kitchen laying it all the way down the countertop on top of wax paper, and it just brings back so many memories for me every time that I make it, every time that I eat it, and just makes me feel so much more connected to her. And my Mima is the reason that I love cooking. She's the reason that I just gravitate towards this, and probably the reason why I do what I do now. And so often within these videos, I focus on the science behind things and that everything is very regimented and calculated and that the measurements are very precise. And that is not what this recipe is. This recipe is very much done by feel. It's very much done by the way that things look. It's very much done by exactly where things are in a particular moment. And so it's not something that you may master right off the bat. It's something that takes some practice. I made this with my Mima more times than I could count before I got to the point that I could make it by myself. And it was one of those things where I watched her myself the first couple of times, and then I made it alongside of her. And then as we got further and further along, I got to where I was doing more and more of it. And then as she got older, she was more watching because she didn't feel like making it as much. And she would get to the point that she's like, hey, you want to make some pastry? And I knew that meant that she was ready for some pastry. And so I would make it and we would all enjoy it. But I have done some things over time that, because I work full time, and sometimes you want pastry, but you don't have time to do all the rolling out and all of that kind of stuff, and it does kind of make kind of a mess. I've figured out how to freeze it, so I'm gonna show you how to do that in this video. I'm gonna show you how to drop it into the water and follow all these procedures. There's a couple of things that I do a little bit differently than her, so I'm gonna show you what I do with that. And those differences are not things that make a difference in the final product, but they're things that just make it a little bit easier to do over time. So I'm sharing with you guys an old family recipe, and let me know in the comments whether you grew up calling it chicken and dumplings or chicken and pastry, and let me know if you decide to try this. And here we go. So to start out with, you're going to make the broth, and you can do this in a crock pot overnight, but I'm going to be doing it in a pot on the stove just because I'm doing the same day. So you're going to fill the pot with bone-in chicken, and this can be chicken thighs or leg quarters, whatever is on sale, whatever is the cheapest is just fine. You could use whole chicken if that works too. But that's going to be any chicken that you have that is on sale, that is bone-in, and whatever the cheapest amount per pound is. And you want to fill up the pot pretty much, and then you're going to add some salt, some pepper, some Greek seasoning or some poultry seasoning in there. Get a good amount of seasoning in there because you want to make sure that this has got lots of flavor, because the pastry does suck up a lot of flavor. Then you are going to add enough water to that pot to cover the chicken, and then place it on the stove on high. So once that comes to a boil, you're going to turn it down to medium-low and simmer. And you want to simmer that for 45 minutes, and that's going to get as much flavor as possible out of those bones. And that is the goal. We want to get the flavor out of the meat and the bones for this. We're making a broth. This is not a stock. A stock is made with just bones. So while that is simmering, we're going to work on making our pastry. And this is the bowl that my Mima had that I'm using here. But you're going to start by sifting about 2 cups of flour into a wide bowl. Generally, I don't sift things, but for this, because that's the way my Mima did it, that's what we're going to do. Then we are going to put a cup of oil into the flour. Now, if you are making a smaller amount, you're going to use about 1/4 cup to 1/3 cup. I'm trying to make enough to freeze, so I'm making a big old batch. So this is probably enough to feed a family for a couple of nights, and then enough to make about 2 more batches after that. Then we're going to get about 2 cups of water over that flour and oil. And so it's going to seem like a very, very sticky mash to begin with, but you're going to whisk that together into a paste, and it's going to seem kind of like glue almost. And these dough whisks are really, really great for doing this. They're also called a Danish whisk. And then what you're going to start doing is adding in your flour, and then we are giving up on whisking at this point, and you're going to start mixing by hand. And you're going to get a very soft dough, probably about the consistency of peanut butter. It's kind of barely hold together. It's even softer than a biscuit, but you just want a very, very soft dough that is barely coming together. And if you'll notice, I'm just kind of working my fingers just a little bit, lifting and moving around a little bit, and we're going to add a little bit more flour in there. But we want a very soft dough because we are going to be rolling this out very, very thin. And throughout this video, you're going to see that I get just more and more flour on my shirt, and that's just the nature of the beast. Feel free to wear an apron. I've just never been that person. And I am showing this in real time just to show about how much time it takes. And as you can see, it's just real soft. And then you set that off to the side, and now we're going to get ready to roll. So the easiest way to get the flour evenly on there is to sift it over. So you're going to sift the counter liberally with flour. And when I say liberally, you do not want to see the counter through that flour. We're going to put a big old batch of flour over there. And this is a messy procedure. Just be prepared for the fact you're going to be doing a lot of cleaning. Then you're going to divide about a 2-inch ball of dough off of that dough ball and pat it down onto that flour, and then you're going to sprinkle that dough liberally with flour on top. And because this dough is super sticky, you're going to be keeping an eye on this throughout this whole process. So I'm using a marble rolling pin because that weight kind of helps out, but you're going to roll that into an oval. And as you can see, it's sticking a little bit, which means I still need a little bit more flour. And then once you get that into the oval, you're going to turn it 90 degrees and then roll that oval into a circle. And this is slowed down a little bit. And then at this stage, you want to lift that up and then get some more flour underneath there. So I'm lifting that off of the board and then putting some of that flour underneath there and then putting it back down just to make sure that it is not going to stick. And then I take a little bit of flour off the board and sprinkle it on top so that it doesn't stick to the rolling pin. And as you're going, if it's continuing to stick, you're going to still pull a little bit more flour to continue to make sure it doesn't stick. And you always want to make sure that this is able to move, because if it's not able to move, that means it is sticking. And I am turning this one over just because the first one tends to be the one that you're learning things a little bit on and kind of learning this particular batch of dough. But you are going to continue rolling this out until you can see the color of the counter or the board through the pastry. You want to roll this as thin as you possibly can. It is probably thinner than 1/8 of an inch. And if it tears a little bit, it's not that big of a deal because we're dropping it into the broth later on. So don't stress too much if it tears, but you're just wanting to get this as thin as you possibly can without letting it stick. And then once you have got that as thin as you can get it, you're going to take a pizza cutter and cut it into pieces about 1.5 inches wide by about 3 inches. This is not exact either, as long as Your pieces are kind of separated, you're good to go. And I am laying this out on a parchment lined sheet. Mima always laid it out on wax paper on the countertop. Or she would lay it directly on the counter to let it dry out a little bit. But I found that using the parchment helps out a whole lot, because that way you don't have to have as much counter space. And you're going to lay it out like you see right there on the sheet pan. I put the parchment on the sheet pan and then lay it on there. And then you're just going to lay another sheet right on top of that and just keep on layering pieces. So we've got layer number 2 coming on. And then before we roll our second one, I will usually break up the dough into all of your 2-inch dough pieces all at one time, just so that I can kind of plan out how many different batches I'm going to have to roll. And same process, you're going to make sure that it doesn't stick in either direction and keep on rolling that out. And this one I did not flip, but I'm still making sure that it's not sticking. You can always lift it up a little bit to make sure, but you're going to just continue rolling and cutting that out until all of your dough is used. And you just continue to see me get more and more covered with flour. And it might seem wasteful with the flour, but the flour does get taken up with the dough as you're rolling. So in the end, you're not scraping a ton of flour off the board. This is over 27 minutes of rolling condensed into about 30 seconds of footage. So it takes a while. Once your 45 minutes are up with your broth, you're going to remove your chicken from the broth. And a slotted spoon usually works pretty well for that. And then you are going to add a little bit of water back into that and leave about 1.5 to 2 inches at the top of the pot, because you're going to want to leave space for your pastry to go in there. And then I always add some chicken bouillon to it. This is just going to add a little bit of chicken flavor to it. And I use a sodium-free bouillon so that we're not adding extra salt. And the other thing you can add is chicken base. And chicken base is like a paste that is basically a condensed version of chicken broth. And this is the brand that my Mima used, and I highly recommend it. It's basically like chicken broth in a jar, but you do want to whisk that in and let it cook a little bit, and then you're going to taste that and adjust your salt, pepper, Greek seasoning, poultry seasoning, and get it tasting really good. You do want it to be a little stronger than you think it should be, because the pastry is going to suck up a lot of that flavor. So after that, you're going to bring this to a boil, and then you are ready to start dropping your pastry. So to drop your pastry, you're going to want your tray of pastry, and you're also going to want a trash can nearby to put your parchment in as you're pulling that off. And then you're also going to want a slotted spoon as well. And your pastry is going to be your water is going to be at a rolling boil, but as you drop the pastry in, it's going to lower the temperature of it, so that boil is going to calm down a little bit. But you're going to be dropping it in, making sure that every piece is coated in that broth, and making sure that every piece is separated. If you let the pieces touch each other with the flour, then it's going to be very sticky and gummy. So you want to make sure every single piece is coated in that broth, and you're going to use your slotted spoon to kind of assist in that process. And you do want to drop this as quickly as you can. I did 6 of the half sheet size of the parchment for about a gallon of the broth. And this whole amount that I made, I think made about 16 sheets. So another thing that we do is we add eggs into the pastry. And so you're going to crack those into a little dish. And then you're just going to slide those down the side of the pot around the edge. At this point, your temperature is going to be a little bit lower, but those are going to cook and be kind of like a poached egg, but they're poached in the chicken broth, which is really good. So we're doing 6 eggs for this size pot. Once you've got your eggs in, you're just going to put your lid on, turn that down to low, and cook it for 20 more minutes, and then it is ready to serve. You can also, while this is going on, we didn't ever eat the chicken in the pastry, but you could be cutting up your chicken to add back in later on. To freeze your remaining pastry, you're going to slide that off of the sheet pan, and then after you've slid that off, you're going to want to count and see how many sheets of it, because you're going to want to put that on the bag that you're freezing it in. And then you are going to add another sheet of clean parchment on top of there and kind of press it down a little bit, and then carefully fold that in half. And then you are going to slide that into a freezer bag, removing as much air from that bag as you possibly can so that you're not getting freezer burn going on. And that can actually, this pastry can be dropped into the water frozen, or into the broth frozen, so that you can keep that in mind. Always make sure you're labeling this with the date, what it is, and how many of the sheets you have is also helpful to know, so you know how much pastry you have and how big a batch you can make the next time. And then you want to freeze that flat on a sheet pan until it's firm, and then after that you can stand it up in your freezer after it is frozen. So you can add your chicken back in there. We never did that, and I think that might be because this was a way that my Mima stretched out chicken growing up, because she grew up in the Depression, and so we never really put the chicken back in to the chicken and pastry. That was saved for chicken salad or something, but you're welcome to put that chicken back in there. Mima even talked about using pastry in tomatoes and butter beans and things like that, and this was a way that Depression era families used to stretch out the things that were more expensive, since the flour was cheap and the main dishes were a lot more. So I hope you guys get to try this out. Let me know in the comments if you do, and we'll see you soon. This is just a reminder that we do have our 2 membership levels, 20 quart and 5 quart, so please feel free to sign up for those. There's 2 different price levels for that. But if you want to support the channel in an absolutely free way, please hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing, and it helps support the channel, and you'll get notifications whenever our new videos come up. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of finding out a recipe of our family, and we will see you next time.